Hi, I'm Dr. Lewis Boynton. Thanks for letting me introduce myself without the benefit of a PowerPoint. So I put this together with a nice intro video. So that's my credentials. I do qualitative research. I definitely do research on the quality of life. I do a lot of things on therapy and something that I call a narrative of a healthy and well-lived life, or the good life, if you'd like to put it in those terms. And so generally, I do talks and train people, and I have done a lot of research on disaster preparedness and disaster mental health. I was a primary research for the, is everyone aware of the Georgia.info, disaster.info, georgiadisaster.info? It's a website that's designed to help people during large disasters. I don't know if anybody knows of that, but it's got a lot of information and resources for the public. And so during my research, I looked up topics like first aid, how people can get through trauma, how people can sort of create better situations for themselves through practice and developing good habits in life. And these are some of the effects of trauma. And I think a lot of people are experiencing different levels of trauma during this corona pandemic, right? Would you all agree? Some people feel like it's not a big deal. Other people feel like it's a really big deal. It's hard to go outside. If you've got family members that you worry about. So these are a lot of the things that are going on for people. Some people feel like it's a big hassle. Some people are worried about work and their job. So all of those things can lead to what we call trauma. And trauma is really like long-term stress over a period of time related to quick, sudden changes. So although it feels like this pandemic's been going on for a while, it did come on pretty quickly and everything in the world changed. So these are just some symptoms, effects of trauma. And physiological, you have an effect on the HPA system. Does anybody know what that is? The HPA system is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal system. And that actually is what happens when you feel stress. Stress is like the pressure you feel inside. And I'm sure everybody's felt stress. So it's the pressure you feel. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's physiological. But a lot of that's controlled within the HPA system. We also have dendrite functioning reduction, which dendrites are the little connections in between your neurons in your brain. They help you to think. They help you to react. They also help you to breathe. They help your heart rate. But the function comes as you have long-term stress. It reduces over time because you're using your brain at a higher rate. Excessive flight or fright or sympathetic neural system activity, that just means that your brain is kind of going all the time. I don't know if anybody had this experience, but when the pandemic first hit, you're kind of a little worried more than you usually are, maybe lost a little sleep, maybe worried about other people being too close to you, or maybe you were worried about something that happened to you. Like, has anybody heard of anybody who's had the coronavirus? Or has anybody of you heard of somebody who's lost their job or something like that? Those may cause stressful things. They'll cause you to, usually your blood rate goes up first, your heart rate goes up first, and then you'll start to produce more chemicals in your body. Also included with that is muscle tension, and then, like I just said, an increased heart rate. So psychologically, you'll feel more somatic symptoms. Those are just like body pains, maybe body pains and aches. Can anybody talk themselves into being sick? Sometimes you can do that. You know, you'll hear something or feel something that's not as big as it could be, or it's just a little bit more. Another thing is anxiety. Anxiety is caused by stress. It's a feeling of worry. It's a feeling of being on edge. It's that feeling inside that can really, that you got to get somewhere, you got to do something, or you need to control something. Another thing that trauma causes is a feeling of being overwhelmed. You don't know what to feel. A lot of things are too big. You don't feel like you can solve the situation. Another one is anger, hopelessness, and then apathy. I mentioned worry, that's in the anxiety cure, but hopelessness is a feeling that this is never going to end. Things are never going to get better. Apathy is kind of like where you just kind of give up and just don't care. This isn't going to get any better. I might as well just give up and move on. So those are some effects of trauma. And I would say a lot of us have had some sort of trauma in the last several months, right? Does anyone remember when we first closed down the town, what the date was? It was March 2020. It wasn't that long ago, but because of like stressful events, big changes in life. Remember, all the food, the stores, the shelves were empty. There was no toilet paper, no bullets, no nothing. And we all had to sort of learn how to adapt and overcome. But during that period, that transition, a lot of people had trauma. It might not have been excessive trauma, but it might have been, like trauma nonetheless. So learning how to deal with that is one of the keys to sort of manage stress. This is just a quick view of what happens when you feel stress. It's just a little video.
Minute Neuroscience, where I explain neuroscience topics in 2 minutes or less.
Can everyone hear that okay?
In this installment,
Yep.
HPA axis. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA axis, is best known for its role in our body's reaction to stress. The HPA axis includes a group of hormone-secreting glands from the nervous and endocrine systems, the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, and adrenal glands. The hypothalamus is a small neuroendocrine structure situated just above the brainstem that controls the release of hormones from the pituitary gland, a hormone-secreting gland that sits just below the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland can release hormones into the bloodstream to reach a variety of targets. In the case of the HPA axis, hormones released from the pituitary gland travel down to the kidneys and influence the secretion of hormones from endocrine glands called the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys. The primary function of the HPA axis is to regulate the stress response. When we experience something stressful, the hypothalamus releases a hormone called corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. CRH signals the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, into the bloodstream. ACTH travels down to the adrenal glands, where it prompts the release of a hormone called cortisol from the cortex, or outer layer of the adrenal glands. The release of cortisol causes a number of changes that help the body to deal with stress. For example, it helps to mobilize energy like glucose, so the body has enough energy to cope with a prolonged stressor. When cortisol levels in the blood get high, this is sensed by receptors in areas of the brain like the hypothalamus and hippocampus, which leads to the shutting off of the stress response through what is known as a negative feedback mechanism.
So what did you guys remember from that video? That when we experience stress, something happens inside our body. That's all I'd like you to remember from that. You don't have to remember the HCA, the ACT, cortisol. Also, studies show that higher levels of cortisol are not good for your body overall. So as you have lots of stress and produce these chemicals within your body naturally, it can cause you to feel bad, things like fatigue. And it can also impact your psychological sort of being, This is some of the disaster research. Not that we're in the middle of a disaster, but we are in the middle of a pandemic. So it kind of applies. Trauma happens for everyone differently. And if you don't like the word trauma, you could just say, put in stress. After something, it can impact the whole family. All traumatic events cause stress. Stress is designed to be a short-lived thing. It's not designed to be ongoing. It's supposed to be 10 to 15 minutes. Usually stress is like when you're speaking in front of an audience, or you've got to do something at work, or you're late for something. So it pushes you. It's only supposed to last 10 to 15 minutes at most. And now we're all living in longer stressful periods just based on the way our lives are designed right now. If we reduce the stress of trauma immediately, it has better lasting results. So, and excessive stress can cause a permanent condition called anxiety, Anxiety can cause lasting psychological problems. Panic, depression, and attention deficits are just a few of those problems. Okay. The only thing people want after a traumatic event is to go back to their life before the event. I mean, does anybody want to go back to life before Corona? When we could go to music, concerts, and baseball games, and you could go play at the park, you could go out to eat, you would hug people when you see them, right? Now it's what, the fist bump, or does people do the elbow? Creative, like a thumb touch. Being that we're in a stressful thing, one of the best things to understand when you're having high stress over periods of times, it can affect you permanently. So I included this slide that says, when do you ask for help? Generally, most people only ask for help if they're in a really dire situation. Yeah. So I thought maybe it would be a good idea just to put some of this stuff up here. None of this is in concrete, and usually what I say to people is if it goes away in a week or less, then you're doing okay. If you're having a harder time, then maybe you should talk to somebody. Maybe you should just talk to a friend. If that doesn't work, maybe somebody who's a spiritual advisor, a minister, or somebody in your church. If that doesn't work, then maybe seek a professional. I have a list of some resources too. So usually I say, when do we ask for help? If you cannot sleep or have less than 3 hours of sleep a night for 3 to 7 days, when you're feeling hopeless and helpless, you should always ask for help if things are going on for like a week to 2 weeks or longer. When you're having anger or mood swings where people are actually saying to you, hey, you look kind of angry. Do you need to talk? So it's always a good time to respond. Maybe I do, but maybe not to you. High anxiety for 3 to 7 days, a loss of interest in things you used to love. So just feeling like you can't do anything. Some of this is limited by Corona, but just feeling like you can't do anything that you used to really like to do, or you don't even like it. Like say you used to like to ride a bike, you can still go ride a bike, but you don't want to do it because you don't like it. Excessive fear and worry. And then I put some of these severe symptoms. If you're not sleeping, if you're having panic, if you're seeing things other people do not see, hear things other people do not hear, thoughts of suicide with a plan and an access to this plan, I mean, those are things that you really want to get some help immediately. Thoughts of homicide with a plan. I know we're staying with a lot of our family very long periods of time and not getting a break, but remember, high levels of risk-taking, impulse control problems, or addictive behaviors. The reason why I put that is not that anybody will ever have these, but if you see these in others or you hear something, you can always suggest that someone go and get help. And there's a couple of resources that I put on there. And believe it or not, there was just a Harvard study that was put out that said 1 in 4 people have thought of taking their own life during this pandemic period because of the stress, because of job loss, because of financial difficulties. I put this up, who do you ask for help? Okay? And does everybody know like what kind of professional to seek out if you need to ask for help? I put them on the slide. Does everybody know the difference between all of these? Because I put in some descriptors of what they do. Does everyone know what a licensed professional counselor is? So that's a person you would go and talk to. They would give you therapy. Maybe like in the old movies, they used to call them an analyst. They do diagnostic and assessment and treatment. They can help you to get through high stress events, help you to manage stress, and help you to work through stuff. Another person that does that same kind of work is a licensed clinical social worker or a marriage and family therapist. More so if you're having problems in your marriage or with your family and your relationships, those professions are people that you go to talk to. They don't prescribe medication. They may have some great nutritional advice. They may have some great techniques to change your habits of thinking, your behaviors, and then maybe they can help diagnose you if something bigger is going on. Does everyone know what a psychiatrist does? So a psychiatrist gives out medication. So generally, most people will talk to a doctor and the doctor will either give them a medicine or send them to a psychiatrist for medication. Sometimes when you're just dealing with stress and managing stress, you may not need medicine because stress is a natural function of the body. But so what I always suggest to people is it's always good to see a professional counselor or a social worker or a marriage family therapist to get diagnosed to see if you do need medicine. Because sometimes when you go on medicine, there's some side effects, and unless you're already diagnosed, it's always better to see a counselor first or a social worker, get a diagnosis, and then go see a psychiatrist. You can also see a counseling psychologist, that's what I am, to do very similar things as a counselor and a clinical social worker. At this point, I'd just like to introduce, I think, what we would call one of the first steps to like dealing with stress, okay? I don't know if anybody has a good exercise they do. Does anybody have a good exercise they do or anything they do to get rid of stress or to lower their anxiety? The reason why I introduced psychological first aid is because you can apply it to yourself, but you can also help others with it. One of the hardest things to do now is the number one thing, which is establish a human connective in a compassionate way. When I say that, does everybody know what that would look like? A compassionate connection with somebody using Zoom? Right? Right now, it would be somebody that you like, somebody that may need help, and somebody that you could just talk to without getting too worked up, right? Another step here is to enhance immediate and ongoing safety to provide physical and emotional comfort. So sometimes even just talking to people when you're going through a hard time, you ever have that happen where you're going through a hard time and you just the act of talking to somebody, even if it's on the phone, just helps you to feel safer, helps you to feel more comforted. So the number one step or the number one quality in psychological first aid, I would say, is kindness. Another, I guess, step is to be calm and help to orient emotionally overwhelmed or distraught people. So you can even work on yourself using psychological aid on your first. We're going to do a couple of exercises at the end to relax yourself, to calm yourself. Has anybody ever meditated, pray, or do any kind of relaxation stuff? Anyone do yoga, stretching, kite flying, gardening, anything like that? Well, all of those things can help to calm you and orient yourself. And then finally, psychological first aid, you can help provide some resources. So I just added that. Why learn? Because you can help yourself after traumatic events. Number two, you can teach others. Three, you can learn how to practice your own self-care. I always promote this. Most people, I would say, don't do enough of that, taking care of themselves. And then psychological first aid, once you learn some of the tools, which are really basic, you can reduce your own stress levels and decrease the amount of anxiety in your own life just by using simple, basic tools. So that brings us to this little portion that we're just going to do a little bit of an exercise. I'd like everyone just to take a deep breath. Ready? And when you take the breath, I'm going to count. I'm going to count to 5 going in and 5 going out. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now let it exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slowing down the breath is one of the best ways to manage your stress. Why? Because of, if you remember from our video in the very beginning, the HPA axis is usually working overtime when we have anxiety or lots of stress. If you ever notice when you're really mad or stressed out, you take very short breaths, very shallow breaths with your heart rate beating really, really fast. One thing that most people don't know is when you're anxious and you're really feeling the effects of stress and you're not slowing down your breath, your brain is burning about 23% of all of the body's energy, okay? 23% of all your calories go to thinking anyway. But when you're overusing it through stressful life and a stressful activity, you need to slow down your breath. It's also really good to practice breathing and counting as a way to sort of regulate your breathing during the day. Has anybody ever tried to practice slowing down their breathing before? Like maybe while they're working at doing something, maybe when they get overexcited, they'll step away from something and start to like let themselves, you know, just breathe a little bit. Really, the goal is like slowing down your brain. If we think about the HPA axis, when we're stressed and we feel it, our body sort of takes over and produces stuff. There's this new theory, but it's actually pretty much based in neuropsychology, that our vagus nerve gets really overactive. And if we get too much stress and too much anxiety, it kind of starts to shut our body down. And we start feeling these very odd physiological effects if we're too stressed out. One more exercise I always like to do is it's just called an exercise in gratitude. One of the key components of being a really good and well-developed human is to be able to reflect on your life and find the good things. It's very important to kind of be able to, number one, breathe and slow yourself down. But if you've got a lot of stress, you've got to be able to reflect and find good things in your life. It's really important to think about things that you have in your life right now and things that you have in your life that can be effective, that you want to hold on to, that you want to keep with you. So can anybody think of 3 things that they're grateful for? Air in my lungs, my heart's beating, I'm alive. How about my dog, my flowers, my garden? Generally, gratitude is just a practice that you can add to your life. What it does is it makes you focus on the positive. If you think about it, we have a lot of negative images coming at us all day long on the internet, on the TV, right? There's some political stuff going on now, isn't there? I think there's this thing called an election going on. There's lots of political ads. People are saying this and that about this is an emergency and you got to do this and you got to do this and you should believe this and you should believe that. But if you find gratitude in your own life, in your own community, it really helps you to feel grateful, centered, thankful. It's a very high state and a very relaxed state. It also helps you to deal with stress. One of the best techniques in dealing with stress and ending it is to say, you know what, this is going to be all right. Has anyone ever done that? You know, you get something and you say to yourself, finally, man, I've been thinking about this for too much. I think this is going to be okay. Let me just take some time and be grateful that I'm just able to deal with this and able to find a solution to this problem. So that's another thing that you can do. Has anybody ever heard the term mindfulness or mindful meditation? Yes. Mindfulness is a cognitive technique that helps you to identify emotions and to do this cool thing called emotional granularity, which means you take your emotions and you slow them down as you see them and recognize them so you can process them normally. Emotional granularity is important because if you get too anxious, you get to this stage where your brain just wants to fight, run, or freeze, or sometimes feed, right? It's the anxiety reaction to high levels of stress. If you can slow your mind down, which is what mindfulness does through, number one, breathing, number two, letting things go, like just relaxing your brain, and number three, like kind of stepping, like it's a weird thing you do. It's like a psychological step outside of yourself so you can observe how you do things. You can see what you really pay attention to. So it really makes you feel like if you focus on stress and bad things, doesn't your life and day feel more stressful, more in a hurry? It feels like you've got to get things done, and it feels like you have pressure on you to get things done. So when you can mindfully see that you're doing that, it gives you the ability to say, hey, wait, I've got to just relax. I've got to, number one, take a breath. Number two, maybe get something to eat. Number 3, maybe hydrating and getting some water. Number 4, maybe going to see somebody I really, really like, who's funny, who's going to make me laugh. Or number 4, maybe going to talk to somebody about what's been bothering me, you know? So having that emotional granularity is really the goal and the number one thing for like stress management. So you can use techniques, but really what you're getting to is you're bringing your mind and body to a quieter place. And really what happens is it's a great transition. You kind of slow things down enough to where you shift to use a whole different part of your brain. You get away from the hippocampus. I don't know if you'll remember that from the video. From using the adrenal system to using the front part of your brain, which is called the prefrontal cortex or the premedial cortex, where when you're really calm and relaxed and making good decisions, you're using a little spot in your brain about this big. When you're anxious, you're using the whole thing. We know this by, fMRIs we've taken of the brain when people are stressed out. The goal is really to identify, understand your emotions, and then have some tactics to get your stress levels down. Would anyone like to share something besides exercise that they do when they're very, very stressed? Any kind of thing you do like to relax yourself before you go to bed at night? Classical music's really good. Baroque is really good for your brain, and classical's good. Soft music helps to relax your brain. I do a radio show. I just put up some of the stuff I do. And on the radio show, we did a thing on nutrition. And one of the things they remind people is not to eat high sugar foods before they go to bed because the sugar goes away. Another great thing is make sure your bedroom is a safe, comfortable place. So if you got some old pillows or an old blanket, it's a good investment to get a new blanket, a new mattress, some new pillows, because the key to having less stress too is to have the right amount of sleep. The right amount of sleep for human beings, not for non-humans, is 7 to 9 hours a night. And for some people, that's really hard. And some people, their schedules, they're night people, so they have a hard time getting that. But if you can get a nap in the day, the best time of day to take one is between the hours of 12 and 3. And generally, if you take a 20-minute rest, that'll help to rejuvenate and revive yourself. So that's a very key thing, is your body works with what's called a sympathetic nerve structure and a parasympathetic nerve structure. We very much have like two things. One is go, go, go. The other one is rest, 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 rebuild. Rest, 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 rebuild. If you have a lot of anxiety and stress and you use that sympathetic nerve system too much, it actually adjusts your balance. So you're hyped up, anxious, worried, thinking about stuff all the time. And it's very hard to concentrate. It's hard to focus. You're always worried about things. And really, so what you need to do is you need to practice getting them to balance out by getting your rest, 7 to 9 hours of sleep, by reducing your stress through different kind of techniques and different kind of relaxation techniques, and trying to find things in the day that you really enjoy that's not related to work, just maybe even after work. If you like walks, take lots of walks. If you like to ride a bike, ride a great bike. If you like to do things to help yourself relax, that's great. If you can't relax for a period of time and it starts to wear on you, that's the best time to go out and find some help. Maybe ask somebody to walk with you so you can talk. You can still do your social distance, but maybe you can still talk. Another great thing that I always suggest to people is if you have a pet or you don't have a pet and you'd like a pet, pets are really good for reducing stress. Just the act of petting an animal can lower your heart rate, can change your breathing sometimes, can really help you to feel like you're relaxing. And that's the goal, is to be relaxed, to deal with stress in a short period of time, and then sort of go past the stress so you can live your life. One thing that humans do that that doesn't always come across is we often focus on the negative, especially if we're going through a crisis or a difficult period of time. So we focus on the negative or we find negative things. So we actually have to practice seeing the positive. Some people are born like optimists and they have a really good life and they can do that. But other people, have stressful lives. Something has happened to them. They have trauma or something going on in their life. And they focus on these negative things and it's hard for them to get out of. Focusing on negative ideas, worrying, causes this thing called, they said in the HPA Access video, a negative feedback loop, but you can do that in your brain as well. You can have a negative feedback loop where you go from one negative thing to another negative thing to another negative thing. And you've got to learn how to stop that and undo it and start to add and substitute positive thoughts, positive imagery, and positive things. So those are some of the things that you can do for to manage your stress. And when you think about psychological first aid, kindness and compassion to others really goes a long way. If you've ever had a hard day and somebody does something nice for you, it's probably one of the nicest feelings you can have, where somebody does, like, maybe holds the door open, says thank you, they're very courteous and polite. Maybe your wife or husband at home is very special to you, extra special to you. That can really change the way you're thinking and the way you're feeling. So kindness and compassion are also great things to practice just in being a human, especially when you know that a lot of people are having stressful times now, because of this coronavirus. Although it's settling down a little bit, I think, but we don't know what the future holds right now. So it's a good idea to build some habits and practices to help you reduce the stress in your life. And I put two numbers on here that you can take down and hold. One's the National Suicide Helpline, and one is the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. And the other one's 911, which is what most people call. But the Georgia's Crisis and Access Line is that if you ever need help or somebody who needs help, they have people in our county that come to you. They have people that can get you resources. And right now, getting resources is really important, if somebody's struggling and really needs some help. So with that, I'm just going to open up for any kind of questions for the next few minutes. That's a really good question. It's very important nowadays because we've all got to get to a place where we can kind of restore things instead of, destroy things. And I would say have a really good plan about a strategic conversation to keep things away from the problem areas. Make lots of kind suggestions versus direct interrogations. You know what the difference is, right? And try to keep the peace a little bit until you can get to a place where you can both be calm enough. Because usually what happens, I think, nowadays is people get emotionally engaged to their content. You know what I mean? They're opposed to their content. They're going to take it as a, almost like a physical attack. I know that's what people have told me is what happens to them. And I spend time with lots of people who are have totally different ideologies than me and are totally struggling with things right now, because the world's changing and most people don't know what to think. So the way to get through that is to be open and try to be open to their experience and try to understand where they're coming from, and then try to get your feelings. Have you ever heard of assertive communication? So aggressive communication is trying to show that you're right and talking over people. We do a lot of that nowadays. Passive communication is waiting for someone to say something that upsets you, and then you react to it. Assertive is kind of in the middle, where you kind of talk and say how you feel, express your own personal feelings without getting upset, and trying to, be able to discuss with someone, and really listen to what they say. So if you practice listening, which is what a lot of people are trying to teach people right now, to practice really listening to what they're trying to say, maybe it's a good entry point for you to say, well, I feel, that makes me feel, like not the same way, I wish we could talk about this, but maybe this isn't a really good place to go because I love you and I care about you, but I don't agree with you, and it might be a softer way to get in there because tensions get hot, especially when it's like a highly political and it's my candidate and the world's going to end if somebody goes here and, but we all know that's kind of not true. It's just that that honestly, if you look on the media, it's all negative images. And I do a lot of media stuff. So it's like colors are used to excite people. Music is used to excite people. Images are used to excite people, So there's like an extra added set of images that, connect to us and make us feel hyped up and like we got to pick a side. Otherwise, we did something wrong. And with your family, you got to love them. And right, if you think about compassion, you love everyone where they are, and they usually can catch up to you after a while if you're kind. Kindness is the hardest thing to do sometimes, but sounds simple, but it's complicated to be kind. Thanks so much for allowing me to do this. I hope it was helpful, and I guess we'll see you next time, right?
That's right. Thank you very much, Dr. Boynton.
Okay. We'll see you at another time. Bye.
Absolutely.